Here we go. Some people will start coming in. All right, we are live. It is April 10th. It's the Digital Roundtable. We have a great guest today. I'm talking to you from the piano at the Worthington Renaissance in Fort Worth, where I attended the Tantalus User Conference for the last 2 days. It was fabulous. We had companies like GE and many others participate, talking about grid data management and technology of the future of grid modernization. And it's been quite an interesting 2 days. We ended up having some stockyards activities, rode some bulls yesterday, got my cowboy hat, and yours are coming in the mail, favor of Tantalus. But anyway, let's before we get rolling today, let's have our own John Sibley Butler play some music.
The highwayman. On the close roads I did ride, sword and pistol by my side. Many maidens lost their babbles to my trade. Many a soldier lost their lifeblood on my blade. The bastards hung me in the spring of 25, but I will remain, and I'll come back again, again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again.
John Butler, how are you, sir?
I am doing exceptionally well. We had the great eclipse here in Austin, Texas, and it was quite a sight to see, to walk out in front of my yard and see it was completely dark at 1:12 p.m. And then, of course, I have been so busy with startups. It's just absolutely amazing. And, I saw one the other day that really takes the place of how we do AI. Traditionally, we have done AI, created algorithms with means, standard regression toward the means, logit analysis. But what they do is they kind of use what we call modal interval arithmetic. And it's Venn diagrams, and it looks to be much more predictive than we've done before. Now, the other thing that's going on is that we're waiting for interest rates to maybe drop. And the economy, as measured by the stock market, is absolutely booming. The jobs report was absolutely stunning for this quarter. And more importantly, I think that the willingness of Americans to do things to shape the future might be coming back. I think we need to separate ourselves from the political arena, as we have always done in America. Go to the venture community and let the new ventures create the opportunities, and get away from the idea or the notion that politicians create jobs and politicians provide our future. I've had some discussions on that. Other than that, in terms of I just cannot put my mind around what's going on in the Middle East, and what's going on in Europe. As a decorated Vietnam veteran myself, I certainly do not like war, but it is certainly here with us again. But again, it is war during prosperity. Again, it is war dealing with great, great, great migrations around the world. It is war with great innovations happening in the world. Perhaps with the exception of the computer revolution, we're seeing now the bio revolution. You see the commercialization of biotech. And of course, I like to say, I will never brag on myself, Llewellyn, because I did the first commercial pet from the bio industry, Glowfish. And so it's a lot of stuff that's actually going on. And what I find really interesting is that we're looking now in this global economy with, by the way, instant communications. Remember, it's not the same global economy of years and years and years ago. It's a global economy with instant communications by individuals, every individual who has a cell phone, and etc. But the question becomes, where are the controls? And then as we move more toward the electrification of things, we know that we cannot meet the demand. Llewellyn had a great article, I might add. I hate to say that, by the way, but he had just had a fabulous article on issues with electrification that we would face in the future. And when I say it was good from the political side because it made people aware of what's going on. Llewellyn would tell you better than me that most people just want to turn on the light and the light should come on. But what are different kinds of industries should we introduce to provide our power? But then the question is, where's the leadership? I wouldn't say that we're completely leaderless, but it's difficult for me to put my finger on someone who is a quote leader. And remember that leaders have come from different parts of the world. It's just the fact that America, in the last 200 years or so, has provided lots of the leadership. But before that, it came from different parts of the world. So I think our biggest problem now in as we move toward in America, it is not the whole idea that the land is going to cook, right? It's not climate control. Our issue is how will we provide power for all of the electrical things that my good buddy from Stanford wrote a book on called The Internet of Things. What do we do in the future to make sure to close the gap between our wishes to save the continent or the world through electrification, decarbonization, and the reality of providing electrics for everything from power tools to the electrification of big machines that will provide to plow all of the food that's needed, provide all of the transportation. They're talking about electric airplanes. That's the problem of the world. The problem of the world, electrification. And I think we need to put electrification before decarbonization. We need to put electrification before climate control, because we would do stuff to spite ourselves. And then if you look at the other interesting thing is that my LSU women lost to Iowa. How was that? But my Northwestern University graduate school won, so I'm doing good.
Hey, there you go, Johnny. Llewellyn, what say you?
Well, I think Johnny is right on some things and a little off on others. I don't think startups are a measure. Terribly, duration is a measure. There are a lot of startups, for example, outside of high tech, which seems to be Johnny's preoccupation, but outside of high tech, there's startups all the time and failures all the time. You want to see what is durable, what will survive. And I think that's the more important thing to look at. We have open issues. The climate is an open issue. I don't think you can dismiss it out of hand. We have just been through the hottest March on record worldwide. That is very serious. That will lead to food shortages, to migrations, to changes, fundamental changes. In due course, if we continue on this trajectory, there are parts of the world where people will not be able to live anymore. India and parts of America. Texas, for example, people will have to spend huge parts of their lives in air-conditioned, whatever it is, houses, cars, tractors, everything will have to be air-conditioned, which certainly will consume a lot of electricity. The other large issue worldwide, but very acute in the United States, is shelter, housing. There is not enough housing. Somehow the dynamic which matched up the construction of new houses and the the demand has broken down. The demand is exceeding the availability both of houses for purchase and of rental properties. That is a large pain to a society and causes a lot of anxiety in a society, as the situation on the southern border causes anxiety. And certainly the war in the Middle East and the war in Europe are vast sources of uncertainty and therefore anxiety. So we find ourselves doing quite well. As Johnny so correctly said, the stock market is booming, employment is full. It's a very exciting time, except there is anxiety. And there is anxiety because there are these open issues.
Absolutely. Well, I want to refresh our thinking about my current paradigm of sounding the alarm. I've been talking about the EVs for a long time and how they're going to require grid delivery of energy to increase probably tenfold over the next 20 years as we're trying to decarbonize everything. And yeah, I'd be remiss to remind everybody the utilities are really in a tough spot as they move at a natural pace to depreciate assets. And they need to move a lot faster coming forward to not only handle the EVs, but also to handle cryptocurrency, also to handle the notion of data centers increasing with the advent of AI, which according to Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, increase the amount of energy per data center 10x. And then ultimately, but not least, the work that is being done for the vertical economy, drones and vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, which come and go on a vertiport of the future near you. In vertiports, according to the work that we're doing for TxDOT here at Texas State University, the consumption of a vertiport will be 1 megawatt hour each. And we're predicting there will be 10,000 vertiports in Texas. So that's roughly 10 gigawatt hours added to the load of the grid, which at peak today is 85 gigawatts. So probably Texas will go from 85 gigawatts to about 180 gigawatts in the next 20 years. And the question is, how do you manage that and where's that growth going to come from? So in the notion of digitalization of everything, the innovation is paramount and key. And we have Professor Ilya Strebulaev. I don't know if I'm saying your name correctly, Professor, but correct me, please. And he has been working quite a bit as faculty of finance at Stanford Graduate School of Business at Stanford University on the notion of the market, the venture mindset, innovation, funding innovation, the challenges of that cycle, historically come and gone in different models. And I believe that he's professing a new way of doing it. Professor, how are you?
Andres, hello, I'm fine. Thanks so much for having me here.
Absolutely. We're interested in learning more about the work, the seminal work that you have been doing at Stanford. And I have to congratulate you on that one of your peers got elected to be president of the university. And that's quite an exciting time. You know, it's nice to see the president of the university come from the School of Business, specifically from the Graduate School of Business. And it only makes me wonder where Stanford is going to go in the next 20 years. But let's talk about you and the work that you've been doing.
Thank you, Andres. Thank you, Andres. My dean, John Levin, who is also my close friend and colleague, indeed, has just been elected as the next president of Stanford. Mm-hmm. And I hope that Stanford University under his command is going to be even more venture-minded, because that, I think, determines that's how I would describe business school. So very briefly about myself, and then I will go straight into what John and Llewellyn talked about, because I have a lot to say about those, and I would love to hear your feedback as well. So very briefly, I've been at Stanford for 20 years, and I've been doing research and teaching on venture capital and innovation. In terms of research, I founded, and I'm now the director of the Venture Capital Initiative at Stanford. And the idea really is to study anything about innovation. For example, how people make decisions when they decide on innovative projects. be they angel investors, venture capitalists, startup founders, or indeed innovators or executives in large companies or regulators for that matter, for example. And my team and I publish a lot of research on this and many, many other topics all around venture capital and innovation. In terms of teaching, I developed a class called Venture Capital for Entrepreneurs. That is now one of the most popular classes at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. In fact, last year we had 240 MBA students who were on the wait list, so who wanted to take but could not take the class because there is a very high demand for it. And out of over now 2,500 students who took my classes at Stanford, I have hundreds of people who started companies, who became venture funded founders, as well as many, many of those companies who became unicorns and very successful multi-billion-dollar companies. I also have hundreds of students who became venture capitalists in their own right. Many of them, in fact, managing now their own funds around the world. And also, I've been working a lot with large companies and regulators about corporate innovation and about what I call the venture mindset. And indeed, my former student, who is an ex-partner at McKinsey in charge of innovation, as well as a person who was in charge of launching many new products on Amazon, Alan and I, we wrote a book recently that is coming out very, very soon, as already you can pre-order it on Amazon. It's called The Venture Mindset. And that in fact summarizes all this research and teaching at Stanford 20 years. So that is briefly about me, Andres, and I'm happy to answer in detail all of this. But let me go straight to what John and Llewellyn talked about, because obviously I have a lot of comments. And here's one, is that as a part of studying the venture mindset and innovation, I studied the speed of innovation in various industries. And the bottom line is that in the past, the disruptive innovation came to some industries at specific periods of time. For example, at the beginning of the 20th century, we experienced innovation in the transportation. So if you look at the Easter Parade in New York in 1900, then there will be no automobiles. In fact, there's only one automobile taking part. 13 years later, in 1913, and you will see only one horse-driven carriage. That was the disruptive innovation. And if you were a horse breeder in 1900, that would have been tough times for you that you could not have predicted. But it happened only in a couple of industries. What is happening now, and I see this around the industry, and it's way out of Silicon Valley, it's way out of tech industries, that innovation and specific disruptive innovation is happening in every single industry, including in the industries that are very familiar to you: electrification, construction, utilities. And I can see this both from venture funds that invest in a lot of startups that I would say could not have existed even 10 years ago. There's a special terminology now called prop tech, which is property technology startups, or construct tech, or you mentioned EV, so electric vehicles, EV tech. And there are billions and billions of venture money around the world being spent right now. I see something else coming out, both from my research and from me traveling around the world, is that I think that a lot of other countries are way ahead in terms of applying the venture mindset principles to all these industries. Let me just give you a specific example. I've just been to Dubai, and then I visited all the capitals in the Middle East, Abu Dhabi, Doha, Muscat, and Riyadh, and several other countries there. And there's an amazing boom there in terms of construction and electrification. And that is because also these countries trying to wean themselves off of oil or try to diversify their industries. But do you know what I'm doing there? they invite me because I'm an expert in the venture mindset, effectively in how to make innovative decisions better in a large company, okay? Or if you're a large regulator, let's say you're a country leader. And I've been there many, many times now. So I've just come back there. And we go over, a full day session with maybe 50 executives who actually make decisions on specific points of the venture mindset. And this is what I wrote a book about. And it's interesting that in all this industry that you mentioned, John and Llewellyn and Andres, I worked with companies there and elsewhere around the world. And I don't think I worked with a lot of companies in the United States. And I think that is one empirical observation that you have to take into account.
Mm-hmm.
And when I
Interesting.
when I observe even local startups, startups started by my students, there are a lot of institutional venture funds that invest money. And then there are a lot of strategics. And you know what? Many strategics come from outside the United States. Moreover, one of the studies I did, which is a part of this venture mindset project, is my team and I studied almost every single large corporate venture arm, which means that large corporations have venture units that invest in startups. And we looked at a lot of details about how they make decisions, in what they invest, and so on and so forth. And I can tell you that these venture units of very large companies, outside including in those industries you mentioned, outside the US are more active these days, and typically even organized better.
Sure.
So I think that is something that immediately came to my mind when I heard what John and Llewellyn were saying. And a couple of remarks right away about why I call it the venture mindset. Because I think that all my 20 years at Stanford can be summarized in the following way, is that innovation that I studied, so in fact, I went into like 450 venture capital firms, and I studied how they make decisions, or I went into dozens and dozens of large companies and explored how they make decisions to identify best practices. So what I think it could be summarized as innovation is not chaos. People think that innovation is about serendipities, like inventions, their luck. Innovation is not chaos. Success in venture industry, for example, in startups, is not luck. Many people think it's luck, like it's gambling. It is not luck. It is not gambling at all. Rather, it is a process. It's a very specific process of how you make decisions. It is just a different process. And that is the critical point. It is very, very different process from our traditional mindset, how traditional companies or traditional companies, including in construction, utility industries, operate. So I think that is the critical point. And especially as today, the industries are reimagined. I think it's a mistake to think about innovation as being about tech, because very often, I hear when I talk, especially to people from outside Silicon Valley, the moment they hear, like I'm, traveling on the plane, I talk to the person next to me, or I'm professor at Stanford from Silicon Valley specializing in venture, they think, oh, it's tech. It is not tech. That is the critical point, is that I think that is the misunderstanding. Even venture capitalists, they don't invest in tech. What they invest in different business models, the new types of business models. It just so happens that in the past, all those business models were mostly about technology. But these days, it is different. So, and the biggest changes in the business models today that I see that are coming out of venture, I see it in transportation, I see it in automotive, I see it in construction. And just to give you some examples that you're very familiar with, but I see it now across every single industry. Like think about Uber. So Uber was made possible, or ride sharing was made possible because of technology, But in reality, it succeeded because it's a different business model. It is the largest taxi company in the world. It doesn't own a single car. It's a different business model. Or
Yeah.
think about warehouses. Again, my co-author Alex launched a number of them in Amazon, okay? So warehouses are now operated using very, very different principles. And it's not about technology, it's about business model. So warehouses today are like vending machines, okay, without humans. It's a very different, it's a different cost structure, very different business models. Or think about Tesla, which is not really a car, but software installed over car hardware, like Windows or Android on your smartphones, okay? And when I work with executives in large companies, and that is the reason we rewrote the book, The Venture Mindset, is that what will happen to your sectors, it's not that it will be reimagined by technology. But in fact, it's going to be a different business model. And I think if any incumbents will fail, it is because, not because they're behind in technology. That is because they're behind in understanding the implications of technology for changing the business models. Okay. And John mentioned AI. And of course, AI drives a lot. But again, don't think about AI as technology. Of course, it is technology. Okay. But don't think of the role of AI in your industries as technology. What actually is happening is that it changes the way the business model of your industry works. It changes the nature of competition. So I'm sure you are in construction and utilities. Many of you use AutoCAD, right? So remember the life before AutoCAD? That was well, maybe some do. So my father was an engineer, so obviously at the times where there was no AutoCAD or software, okay. So he spent his life, presumably standing over this huge board where he was drawing stuff. So it is a different business model. It's a different relationship between work and labor as well. And so, right, and it allows changing stuff. So let me give a specific example that I'm familiar with because I worked with large companies. Something that I was amazed, but I'm very curious about whether our participants will be amazed, whether the three of you will be amazed at that or not, as experts in the specific industry. So I worked with this large company, the Asian company, and they use the technology, okay, to build a 10-story building, commercial building, in one day. In one day. Okay. Now, of course, they use technology, but in fact, it's not about technology. It's about decision making. It's about changing the process of decision making. Or I've come from the Middle East, how they now construct their railroads there and electrify the countries. It's very, very fast. But again, it's not about technology or just technology. It's about how they make decisions.
Yeah.
Right. And so that is, and then I will pause so that you can react. That is the reason why we wrote the book. So the book is about 9 specific principles that I identified in my 20 years of studying the venture industry of how venture capitalists make decisions that make them successful. And I'm now convinced that all of us, including all of our participants today, can improve their decision making, can get ahead of their competition by using these 9 principles. Now, venture capitalists use these 9 principles, and I call them the venture mindset, which is very different from the traditional mindset, not because venture capitalists are smarter than us, not because they're more innovative, not because they're different species, okay, from Mars or whatever, just because for the last 50 years, they faced a very unusual, hostile environment where, and I think Llewellyn mentioned that, where most startups they invest in tend to fail, where there are a lot of unknowns, where there's a huge amount of uncertainty. And so to succeed and survive in this environment, they had to come up with different principles. And amazingly enough, even they don't realize this because, they're not scientists, okay? They're not researchers. They just do this, to survive. And so I went in and studied this and identified exactly these 9 principles. And so the book is about each principle, and behind each principle, the specific mechanisms, specific, what I call playbook, like what you actually have to do to make changes. And I really hope that utilities, contractors, those who care about cities in this country and so on, will take those principles, because I think people in other countries that care about those issues are already very actively working on these principles of how to apply them in their everyday business.
Sure. Johnny?
Well, it's good to have a young scholar. Of course, seeing somebody in finance do this is like seeing somebody, wow, how did this guy in finance get to this great impressive? Let me tell you a little something about myself. University of Texas, I was director of the IC Square Institute, and we did all of this stuff. Matter of fact, we founded the Kosmeski Center there at Stanford. Then I founded the Herb Kelleher Center. I've done, I don't know, 200 articles in around these areas. I just sent you one of them. But I think it's very, very interesting. And let me just comment on, let me just start with a basic kind of proposition here. In my research area, the J. Marion West double chair professor, there at the University of Texas. What I find is that start out with a statistic that 98 and 99% of all great companies in America were founded in 3 regions. Route 128 in Boston, Silicon Valley, and Austin, Texas. And then I have a book called Global Issues in Technology Transfer. And it's not so much about the mindset, because my background is organizational science from NU, sociology, history, economics, and et cetera. And what role does the ecosystem play? That's the first question I'm going to ask you, not necessarily the mindset, given the data that we have. And the second question is that in Austin, Texas, we lean more on wealthy people and angel networks rather than VCs. And let me just tell you why. As you know better than me, it's an institutional kind of arrangement, and it's an enterprise. It's an up and down enterprise. And it's up sometimes and sometimes it's down. So, for example, in Austin, Whole Foods, Angel Networks, Michael Dell, Angel Networks, my company, Glowfish, Angel Networks, my other company, Nuclear, Angel Networks. So we didn't depend on institutional investors necessarily, because we thought that they did not bring to the table the kind of knowledge and know-how that you need to bring. And the other thing is that in terms of the technology, I have a work on the science of entrepreneurship, where I traced it back to 2000 BC. And you're right, as the technologies change, the business models change. And again, as a finance professor, I'm happy that you're more Schumpeterian. You're more Schumpeter, right, than Keynes, right, who I think didn't have a clue. But being trained in economics, you're going to get Keynes. So I want you to comment on the importance of the ecosystem. By the ecosystem, what I mean is the knowledge and know-how of the system, the university system, the technology transfer of the system, because I'm not convinced that it's just, quote, a mindset, because you probably come from the psychological tradition of finance rather than the sociological tradition of finance. But just comment to me on the importance of the ecosystem. And for the audience, what I mean by the ecosystem is, here in Austin, we love to have big companies come here because we had such a dynamic ecosystem. They were going to leap out and start their own company. Okay. And I sent you an article where I put the whole ecosystem in mathematics and in mathematical formula so that you can really take a look at it. But can you just comment on the ecosystem, then comment on angel networks, and comment on, the television was technology. It just changed the business model. The automobile was technology. It just changed the business model. So technology is the content and it's the form and the business model is the content.
Thank you, John. Great questions. Several comments. First, I absolutely agree that ecosystem is critically important. And in fact, I, again, also spent 20 years, of course, studying innovation ecosystems, including Silicon Valley ecosystem. However, when I say the word mindset, that includes the players in the ecosystem. If you have a lot of players in the ecosystem that don't have the right mindset, the ecosystem will not be successful. Let me give you a specific example of the Silicon Valley ecosystem. You mentioned large companies. They play a huge role. But what kind of companies play a huge role in the Silicon Valley ecosystem? Those that do have the venture mindset. So what are the specific examples of those companies? So let's think about Microsoft. I think Microsoft is an interesting case. You know, in around 2010, 2011, most of my MBA students thought that Microsoft was the next great dead company because it missed the mobile revolution, it missed the gaming revolution, it missed the cloud revolution, and so on and so forth, okay? Why? Because the leadership at the time, the leadership of Microsoft, lost its venture mindset. So in fact, it became a much lesser important player in the ecosystem. For example, it had a venture capital fund, Microsoft Ventures, which was, I think, utterly unsuccessful. And then what happened is that Microsoft brought in a new leader, Satya Nadella, who I think is one of the most venture-minded leaders that we have right now. And he changed the way people make decisions in Microsoft. He changed the way the relationship with the ecosystem works. Now, he had resources to do so, and he had the people, but that was not enough, John, okay? A specific example of this that we describe in the book in some detail, a friend of mine is Nagraj Kashyap. He is a venture capitalist. He, in fact, the first institutional investor in Zoom, okay? Thanks to Zoom, I'm now seeing you. Nagraj, who was the head of Qualcomm Ventures, got a call from Satya, and Satya said, Nagraj, I would like you to build a new venture fund in Microsoft. And Nagraj agreed on one condition, that he could design venture fund the way he wants. Why? Because of the venture mindset principles. And Satya agreed. And so M12 became one of the most successful venture funds out there. But again, why? Because it interacts with the ecosystem using completely different principles than the previous Microsoft ventures. So that is a specific example. John, let me give another example. You mentioned University of Texas, Austin, where I have a lot of my great colleagues at the business school, at the Maccombs great business school. And so the real ecosystem cannot exist without a university, I think. Real
Especially without engineering. It could exist without the business school, but it cannot exist without engineering.
Well, it's your opinion, John. I think actually it was also very important, given that I'm from the business school.
As a business professor, you know, I mean,
In fact, I will say something different, is that I think the real ecosystem cannot exist without both the business school, the engineering, and more so these days without additional schools such as the medical school. Do you know that the most successful startups that came out of Stanford are all founded by two founders or more, where one founder was from a business school and another founder was from the medical engineering school or the School of Earth Sciences, we have this one, or the School of Sustainability, and so on and so forth.
I agree with that.
I call it interdisciplinary stuff, and that's again also the part of the venture mindset. So, but I think that, John, I think universities will succeed not because they just have a lot of money or have a lot of smart people or have a lot of great engineers, but also if they have the right mindset. You know, the reason why.
Yeah, well, let me just say, I agree, but I think I use innovation rather than open innovation. And if you stop and look at, if we look at my research and what people take a look at, is that there are great mindsets all over America. But unless the mindset interact with the innovation and with medicine, and you know, when we did our medical school here in Texas, our attention was between the researchers in biology and chemistry and et cetera, and the MDs who did not have PhDs, who were seen as just providers. So I think that you were right, but I also think that if you look at Stanford, it started in engineering and not in the business school. I think the business school has come, all business schools have come a long way being a faculty in one. So I do think, and I also created the first class that we brought engineers together with our MBA programs. You don't want to just teach MBA programs because, as you said, that is for corporate America, and they're not too. We do not teach the innovation mindset right in business schools, but we do now. But historically, of course, you know, I'm a 48-year-old. I've been there 48 years, so it's a little different. But I agree with you, and I think
John,
also.
let me interrupt you for 1 second, because something that you said I would like to take an issue with, and that is, so engineering is critical, but I think engineering by itself does not bring you innovation.
I mean, the sciences. I mean, it could be the science. Right? We got to commercialize it. Yes.
And science does not bring innovation. Do you know that?
Business school bring innovation.
And my book is,
they commercialize it. They commercialize it, right?
So the whole point is that large companies, and the U.S. unfortunately is full of these sad stories, came up with a lot of examples. Came up with amazing technologies that they engineered, and then they were not interested in this. They're lost. In fact, Microsoft is one example that I gave. Here's another example. Cisco, who is in Silicon Valley, okay?
Yeah.
And do you know that Zoom was created inside Cisco? And then Cisco management turned down this project. So the founder, Eric Yuan, who had to resign, had to leave Cisco because he was passionate about Zoom. And at some point, Zoom was valued more than the entire Cisco.
Yeah, but let's not confuse management. Let's not confuse management training. And as we say, if you want to kill your company, give it to a manager. with innovation management. So if you look at the research on innovation management, we make distinctions between managers who are very, very innovative, who are more likely to leave, which they have the history of, and those that really kill a company, which Schumpeter actually talked about. And there's, of course, great traditions, great research in both traditions that goes back so far. So I do agree with that. I'm just saying that if you look at where products are produced, it's done in biology, it's done in chemistry, and it's my job as a business professor to commercialize those things through innovation. That's all I'm saying.
So can I get in here with a question?
Yes.
I've got a couple of questions and some observations. My observation is that in more than 60 years of writing about companies, I find that once they're successful, they're almost antithetical to innovation. They talk innovation and they don't do it. It always takes individuals and individuals who break out of companies. I also, as an observation, am very dubious about innovation in any of the oil-rich countries like the Emirates and Saudi, because it's all underwritten by oil. Abu Dhabi would not have such wild architecture if it weren't for oil. It's not because of the innovation, it's because of the money coming from oil, rather old-fashioned at this point. I think that I love the point that all innovation is not electromagnetic, as we tend to think these days, and it's across the board. And I'm also very enthusiastic. I'm very glad to hear Ilya talk about technology in building. It's absolutely essential, and it's way behind the power curve and has been for a long time. It's very traditionalist, and it needs really to change. But I've always seen the power coming from the individual, and the individual then has to find a corporate home or create one. What I've seen big companies do is they will do evolution quite well. They won't do innovation really well. And these are very different things. They're almost structured against innovation. And I don't think you can get around that, whether they're located. I think it's worse in Europe. I think in Britain, where I've seen government trying to innovate in everything from cars to motorcycles to food, it has been a disaster. And yet the Brits are very innovative people and have given us a lot of the technologies we now accept. So you've always got to look at the individual and see what kind of ecosystem will allow the individual to prosper. I'm interested in how movies are made, because I think they're a fabulous illustration of what I'm saying. You have a huge corporation, big money, everybody an innovator in their own mind, but only one innovator, the director, and the whole thing, and initially the writer and then the director, often the same person. And the entire structure is dependent on one individual, whether it's $20 million budget or $100 million budget. And I don't think it's that much different anywhere else. Whether it was Bessemer with the steel revolution, it is that individual vision that carries through to the new product, the new company, the new wealth. And I just wonder how much you can teach large institutions to innovate when they have every interest in not innovating. Personally, I think the General Motors management system has done much to restrict innovation because it was so tight, it was so organized. I think my old friend Mr. Drucker was wrong in admiring it because it turned out to be, excuse me, a liability, not an asset. Ilya, you're a fascinating man, and I've loved every word you've said. I would like to ask you how we finance, going back to electricity. We have a very interesting situation. Most capital operates on an amortization of about 30 years. In electricity, especially going forward, we have machines, nuclear reactors, that last 100 years or more. And their payout may not be until 60 years after they're built. How do we bring the financing into some kind of relationship to the need to build these machines, which are not being built because there is no financing for them? And that's nobody wants to finance the first of a kind or anything that is going to take 50 years to pay off, 60, 70 years to pay off, because our institutions don't have that kind of vision or endurance.
Thank you, Llewellyn. Okay, several reactions. First of all,
no, we're just discussing. No, we're just a good discussion.
First of all, is that I agree with you that it is very difficult for large companies to innovate. However, the word innovation that we all use, I think very often is misused. I distinguish between two types of innovation, Llewellyn. The first one is what I call incremental innovation. And you know what? Large companies are very good at incremental innovation. To give you a funny,
I agree.
To give you a funny but an important example, I'm shaved today because I shaved using Gillette razor. And do you know that Procter & Gamble, that produces Gillette, employs more PhDs that Stanford, MIT, Caltech, and University of Texas combined? So, and every single year, Procter & Gamble produces a new Gillette razor trying to make sure that we buy it. So that is an incremental innovation. Another example of incremental innovation, which is much more counterintuitive, is when Intel spends $40 billion and builds another fab for its chips. Okay, I call it an incremental innovation. So innovation is not about money. Why it's an incremental innovation? It's kind of the same business model. It is a marginal improvement in technology. The same customer and the same relationship between the company and the customer. And then there's disruptive innovation, Llewellyn. And again, disruptive innovation, in my opinion, is innovation that changes the business model, changes the customer, or changes the relationship between the company and the customer, or the product and the customer. And large companies typically are not very good. They're not designed for this disruptive innovation, okay? Now, but I do hope that you will now read my book, The Venture Mindset, because that is the whole premise. And the whole premise that I think is supported by both my work and by a lot of evidence is that large companies can become better if they want to.
Yeah, let me see if I can bring this together.
Just a second, John, at disruptive innovation. And we give a lot of examples, both tech examples and outside tech examples of large companies that are actually are very good at it. Let me give you one tech example, okay? Amazon. Now, Amazon became a very large company through e-commerce. And when Amazon started its AWS, so the cloud service, there was a lot of pushback because, well, it is a disruptive innovation that was not in the interest of its e-commerce division. Of course, now AWS is more profitable than e-commerce on Amazon. So there are many, many examples of, in the interest of time, I will not give you a lot of examples outside the pure technology, but let's say in manufacturing, the example is 3M. So 3M is a company that's been around for 100 years, and in fact, use the venture minds principles, as we show, again and again to come up with a lot of innovative products. So let's say a disruptive product that all of us use nowadays is Post-it note. It was a disruptive product at the time, and for the company, not just for the industry, but for the company. Okay, and it took a specific set of principles to commercialize this. So to summarize this point, Llewellyn, is that it is difficult, but it is possible. But do you know what? I think that if the large companies will not become effective at dealing with disruptive innovation, they will fade. My
Absolutely.
research shows that 85% of Fortune 500 companies disappeared over the last 60 years. And I think that more will disappear much faster. And those will be those who potentially will continue innovating, but only the incremental stuff. And that's because disruption is much more likely to make all those small innovations completely irrelevant.
Yeah, I agree. And let me just say, let me see if I can put this in some perspective. I'm on the CNBC Disruptive Technology group, and this is where I look at what I've done over the years. Microsoft is a computer science company. Okay, that's what it is. It's a computer science company. That's what it is. Southwest Airlines is a science of flight. Kellogg Cornflakes is a science of food. Amazon is a computer science company. 3M is a materials company. And unless you keep up with the kinds of Schumpeter materials with 3M that's going to disrupt, and if your management does not understand that, then as you would say, Professor, you're in trouble. So my deal has always, and I was taught this at Northwestern University, it was always the following: follow the science. And when you follow the science, then you follow the technologies, follow the Schumpeter. And you cannot start, Wall Street is just making a bet on the sciences that we have. So when I go to, when I teach in Japan, I taught in Japan for 14 summers, taught in China for summers, taught all around the countries. When I open my computer and it's Microsoft in Japan, that's good. Boy, but it's something else in the future, that's bad. So what I really like about the book, and I'm going to read the book as I read all of them. I'll probably review it somewhere. I like the book.
I hope so.
Because it brings an emphasis to ventures, to innovation, to understanding that what the country is about, it's about science and the commercialization of that science. If we lose that to other countries, then we have lost a lot of our history. And when I was in China, I would say I think that we are still ahead in the basic sciences. Okay. But let me, Professor, get your reaction to this. When I was in China, 70% of the kids were majoring in the sciences, whether it was biology, chemistry. You come to America, everybody want to major in business. Now, I was a math major. I was a math major. I came through math, foreign language, sociology, not too much psychology, economics, mathematics, and etc. And of the 16 books I have and 300 or 400 articles that I have, on organizational science, are we losing the mindset, if you will, we'll use that word, by our kids not majoring in the sciences?
Thank you, John. I do think so. I do think so, even though I think Europe, as Llewellyn correctly pointed out, is in a worse shape.
Yeah.
I think so, but Asia is getting ahead, and I see this, and I see this in terms of education.
Sure.
And again, the reason behind this is very simple. I think is that because it's all about, like in the venture world, it's all about incentives, and it's about flexibility. So, by the way, the reason why I think American education is typically better than European education, including in sciences, is because there is such a thing, both at Stanford and at Texas, okay, and in other universities, as a major, which means that A person who comes and as a 17 or 18-year-old at the University of Texas, Austin, does not need to declare major, John, right? You have like 2 years to think about what you're doing best. Well, in Europe, you actually do not go into like a Heisenberg University. Okay, you actually admitted into a department of engineering or aerospace of Heisenberg University. So therefore, in fact, you kind of declare major in a way. They don't have a major concept right away. And I think this flexibility in the American education was much better. Another, which is I think is very important, I already mentioned interdisciplinary, which I think is a critical point. Let me very briefly respond to, as a professor, I hate when I don't answer questions. And John, you mentioned one, and Llewellyn mentioned one that I did not answer. I will try to be very, very brief. I know we're short of time. John, angel. In fact, I've studied a lot of angel networks, and I think that both in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, including, of course, in Texas, angel networks play a critical role. Now, when I say the word the venture mindset, notice that I do not say the venture capitalist mindset. I said the venture mindset. In fact, the most successful angels and the most successful angel networks are using most of the principles that I identified in my research as the venture mindset principles. Okay, so therefore, I think angels play a critically important role, especially for young startups these days. Llewellyn, you asked one question about long-term projects. I think that is really important question. I would love to have another hour to speak about this, because one of the principles of the venture mindset, of course, identified is think long-term. But it's kind of, it's great to say think long-term. It's like when people say, when CEOs of large companies say, we will work on developing great culture. I mean, it's great, but it doesn't tell you anything, right, at all. So the question is about how to implement those specific mechanisms. And so, again, I identified in my research about how to implement specific mechanisms so that mostly through incentives that are people much more interested in longer term outcomes. And yes, of course, some macroeconomic stuff matters. So John mentioned interest rates, of course. If interest rates are very high, it's much more difficult to create those incentives. But some of those are in how you design those incentives. And by the way, I firmly believe that one of the reasons why Silicon Valley became very successful, okay, more successful than, for example, John, you mentioned Boston, Route 128. Historically, Silicon Valley became more successful, not because of its ecosystem necessarily, okay? I mean, they had MIT and Harvard, which at the time was, I guess, better than Stanford. But because partly of its incentives. The way they created what we now know and use like as vesting and options that gave long-term incentives in the company led to a lot of long-term thinking. And I don't think it's about 10 years or it's about 100 years, Llewellyn. It's mostly about planning for very, very, very long-term incentives. And my
I have a go ahead. No, I was going to add a quick follow-up, Professor, if you could chime in. So clearly corporations need to read the book. Startups need to read the book. I'm curious about your thoughts real quick and the principles of your book apply to local, state, and national governments, countries. Clearly, the Middle East is trying to reinvent themselves. What about the rest of the how does the whole orchestra of a construct that is 2,000 years old read your book and reinvent itself?
Andres, I really hope that every single decision maker in a local and state and national government is going to read it, frankly, because it's all about trying to improve your decision making when you face disruptive innovation. So that is kind of a one-line summary, okay? And this is, let me give you an example. So Claudia van Muntz, who for many years was a very senior executive at IBM, and now she's the chair of the National Association of Corporate Directors that include many directors or non-profit boards, those that deal with the regulators and so on, okay? So she read the early draft, and her response was, her endorsement of the book is, read this book now with capital letters for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Every Why? Because it will change the way you make decisions. So that was also the reaction of Eric Schmidt, the former CEO and chairman of Google. Like, read this book, read this book now. So I think, therefore, and I hope when you read this, the book, you will realize this. And Llewellyn mentioned about oil and Middle East. Well, I completely agree that if they had no oil, there would have been no money. But I think that what his point is not about where your money is coming from, but what are you going to do with this money? And in the past 50 years, frankly, they didn't do much. They just accumulated wealth, okay, and bought a lot of fancy jewelry and real estate and chateaus in France and so on. But now, in the past 10 years, for various geopolitical reasons, they're using the money to become much more innovative in the disruptive innovation sense. So I think we have to separate the source of the money and the usage of the money. So yes, everything, like, I've just been to Dubai, everything is built on oil there, everything.
Yeah.
Okay. But in fact, if you come there, and I met with so many startups there and companies that invest in the startups, this, even 5 years ago, like, just pre-COVID, that was not the case.
Yeah.
That was not the case. And suddenly they're ahead in everything, like not just in every single industry. So I think that's how you use money, not just where you get.
Agreed. Gentlemen, I know we're running out of time. We can go over as long as you like. Johnny, I don't know if there are any final questions.
Yeah. I think it's great. I'm gonna read the book, and but as the old professor, I want him to read some books too. Because David Rosenberg's book, Cloning Silicon Valley. It's a great book.
Oh, I know the book, of course.
And my book, John Sibley Butler, Sibley. Just Google me, John Sibley Butler. Go to Google Scholar. Global Issues in Technology Transfer.
Or you can call me up and I will synthesize it in 5 minutes.
Llewellyn, and also George Kosmetsky's book on Zero Time. Which is just the issue of fastness. I think that all of these, I think every little bit of help, because this is what I think, Professor. In my 48 years in this area, people don't understand the business models. So I've worked with, it's like you said, it's not so much. For example, if you look at the website, it started at the University of Illinois. They had no idea of what to do with it. 128 went by the wayside because in Boston they wanted people to belong to certain clubs, and Silicon Valley said we'll do it on a napkin. There's a great book by Saksanian, who's up at Berkeley, a friend of mine who studied these ecosystems. So what I'm saying, I'm gonna read the book. I understand the importance. I got many of them. My books have won many awards, so I understand the importance of reading the books. But most importantly, every little bit helps.
I agree with that.
And the thinking on new venture creation and the venture mindset has got to come back to America, to move it away completely from the political mindset. And I think that that's more important. And I had a president's appointment from President Bush, and I'm working with people now on bringing manufacturing back to America. But when I go around America, Andreas, they don't have this venture mindset.
That's right.
They don't think that they can create the future for themselves. And the importance of college education, I'm proud to say I'm a 4th generation PhD, MD. That's so important, so that people who understand can get together and really, really mold the future of America. And I start with venture creation. So that's why I really appreciate your book. I'm going to read it and tell everybody else to read it. And thank you very much. Now, if you really want to come to a great university, come to a private school out there.
Fascinating. I have to go, but you really have been a wonderful guest and very stimulating. And I hope we have further conversations.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, no. Before we go, I just want to make this plug, and I don't know if you thought about it, but when I look at the title, I get reminded of a book that was very seminal on my professional career called Principle-Centered Leadership by Stephen Covey. And I wonder if your book, I wonder if your book will have a follow-up so that people can get trained on the principles and learn to apply the principles. And if you've thought about all that.
I hope so. They will. In fact, we are doing a lot of executive sessions right now, exactly on those topic. So if you go to the website, thevcmindset.com, you will see a lot of opportunities.
Yeah.
I have to jump
Excellent.
to another call right now. In fact, organized by one of your colleagues. And thank you, Mike. Thank you so much again. And I hope to continue the conversation. Thank you,
Okay.
John. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Take care.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
All
Bye
the
now.
best. Thank you for being with us today. All the best. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.